Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Good Doctors YouTube channel. I am one of those good doctors, Dr. Kristen.
I am the other one. I'm Dr. Erin.
And you're very welcome if this is your first time here. We cover lots of things around these parts. In this particular series, what we're looking at is empathy building art. And how can we facilitate ways for you to step outside of your own life experience and culture as we do the same. This month, as Black History Month, we are looking at the continent of Africa. We've spent the last couple years looking specifically at African American experiences, and we're now trying to look at different experiences of Black peoples around the world and or peoples of color on the continent of Africa, depending on what part of the month you're joining us in. This week is particularly focused on Nigeria. We watched the Nollywood film, The Wedding Party, which is from 2016, and by all accounts was a smash success.
Big hit.
And very well loved within the Nigerian world, the Nigerian movie world. However, we're sitting here as two white ladies who have never been to Nigeria. We are very aware of that. And so we went looking for some experts to help us understand Nollywood. And I found a book that is written, I got it online on Hoopla, which your local library very well may have. If you will excuse me 2 minutes, I will be able to tell you exactly the author of this. The book is Nollywood, The Making of a Film Empire by Emily Witt, who is an American, cool. Published by Columbia Global Reports. And I believe that is the University of Columbia.
Nice.
The prologue to this explains some things from the perspective of a big person in the Nigerian film industry. His name is Femi Odugbemi. I could not find a pronunciation anywhere online. I'm so sorry. Who is the founder of a documentary festival in Lagos, which is the capital of Nigeria, not just a plot point in the Avengers, and a producer on a popular soap opera, and explains Nollywood this way. And I want to read his words because this really helped frame my thinking as we went into this. So he says, up until the last 20 or 30 years, the history and culture of African communities were the narratives of the colonists. Those narratives, quite frankly, beyond not being accurate, beyond not being authentic, were political. Now, cinema is political. Every cinema is political. The only way cinema works for you is if you are in charge of it. Every colony used cinema, whether in the genre of documentary or drama, and they use cinema to what? To alter behavior. They use cinema to explain that it was civilized to use knives and forks to eat, as though the natives were not eating before they came. There was replacement therapy, and film was the tool. If you knew God before they came, the cinema was here to give you a greater God, a better God, and explain to you why your God was rubbish. If you dressed a certain way before they came, they were able to use cinema to assure you that what the Queen approved of as gentlemanly was a suit. Film allowed you to be able to show, to tell, to wow, to entertain while indoctrinating. Unless you were in control of that, your story was at risk because your story was being told by someone else. When Nollywood started out in the 1980s, the executive producers were actually merchants who sold videotapes. And then he goes into this whole thing about how essentially there were no real cinemas that were showing homemade movies. And so people just like watched videotapes in their homes that were all home produced. It was all home movies. That was the beginning of Nollywood, was all home movies.
Wow.
They were essentially sold in Lagos. It was mostly an urban thing. And it was a lot for the houseboys, who were the ones who kept the security, who were in the board period during the day where nothing was really happening. They sat and watched. What they saw was, excuse me, I have to move I have to move the screen to be able to read because my camera's in the way. From the 1990s to the 2000s, the industry began to expand. The limits of the experience of the house girl or houseboy in Lagos were exhausted, but she had a local life in the village, so now we can tell those stories. The way that movies were distributed changed. By the 2000s, VHS was over. There was a video CD, and that was more. He goes on to talk about. It's absolutely like incredible summary of what's going on.
That's amazing.
And then here's the concluding bit. One thing has remained the same. The audience of Nollywood has not shifted. It's the same. Beyond the curious and the academic, there are not many people outside of African experience who venture to even understand what Nollywood is trying to do. And I think that's the biggest confirmation of the political nature of cinema. Nollywood has not sought authentication. It has not sought permission to intrude into the cinema space. Its death has been predicted over and over again. But the only reason it has not died is it became owned by the people whose history it was telling.
Wow.
So we look at
phenomenal. That's phenomenal.
Nollywood is not for us.
Oh, no.
It is not meant to be, in a completely different way that Bollywood isn't for us and isn't meant to be. And I'm not entirely sure if that's because the diaspora has behaved differently. Nigerian diaspora is a very different entity than Indian diaspora. And those movements are different. I'm not sure. But I can tell you that when I was watching The Wedding Party, the thing that I took away that I loved the most is that I didn't understand what was happening most of the time. I loved seeing the changes to a wedding ceremony that both looked a lot like mine and nothing like mine. I always love seeing the fact that food is the most important thing to people, because food is always the most important thing at a party.
The most important thing, yeah.
And I also loved how very casually and easily they switched between English and Yoruba, which is the language. There are many languages in Nigeria, although the main one is English. The tribal and indigenous language used in this film, additionally to English, is Yoruba. I loved that. For people who do not speak Yoruba, I would highly recommend subtitles.
Subtitles, necessary.
Beyond that, there was a lot I didn't recognize. There were some really classic tropes, like the idea that something terrible happens and then you restore your life or have a hard conversation. But a lot of the other tropes are not ones that I was particularly familiar with. And so I just tried to settle myself into being grateful to have like almost a voyeuristic experience into a culture I have not encountered in this way before. What were your feelings, Dr. Erin?
Yeah, I mean, very similarly, we were watching this almost at the same time. And I think it's what I love about exploring different cultures is that it makes you uncomfortable, and it makes you at times think about the lens through which you see the world. And there were times when I was watching this film where I was frustrated, confused, not necessarily entertained, and it kind of like it shakes you out of that. The art should be something that I understand, or art should be made for the way that I see the world. And so I'm always really grateful to get those experiences. I don't think this type of movie is my jam, but I loved. Yeah, I mean, like, we're not owed explanations, especially not knowing the political history of film in colonized parts of the world. They don't owe us an explanation. They don't owe us context at all, because these films aren't for us. They're made explicitly not for us. And that's fantastic. So, I mean, there were parts of the movie I found really entertaining and hilarious. A lot of the characters felt exaggerated, but I don't know if that's, every
if the broadness is a feature or a bug. Yeah.
Every culture has stereotypes and tropes, every form of art. And so there was a lot of that happening in this. Some of it was recognizable, some of it wasn't. If anybody's watching this and knows Nollywood very well, I would like you to tell me specifically if the frazzled wedding planner is a trope that happens. But I think my favorite thing in the whole world was at the end, girl was just sitting there drinking,
and she just took off her wig and was like, we're done now.
And it wasn't even her wig. That was amazing. And she's just drinking Bailey's out of like a crystal goblet, because that looked like one hell of a wedding to wrangle. But I loved the traditional aspects of Nigerian culture and the tribal elements between the two families that I got to see in a way that, all weddings kind of look the same, but they don't. But yeah, I mean, I think it's such a valuable exercise to put yourself in that position. And I'm grateful that Netflix is expanding its always expanding its international platform. And those movies aren't just available in like traditional parts of the world that might watch them, but like putting it on US Netflix as a way for me to expose myself to, like, I never thought in the same day I would watch a documentary about Britney Spears and a Nigerian rom-com for my job. And I loved every second of it, even if I didn't necessarily like the movie. So, I mean, I think did I learn a lot about Nigeria? Not necessarily, but I can learn that on my own, and I can follow that rabbit trail and engage more with the culture, which this movie certainly prompted me to do. So.
And I looked for criticisms of the film, and the main one that I could seem to find is the exaggerated nature of the have and have-nots, and the way that the bride's kind of side of everything was portrayed as really backwoods and grabby and things like that. I could not tell from the reviews if that is still a trope, but they felt it was exaggerated here, or it's not a trope and it was too done. I could not tell from the reviews. But it was certainly something that I thought was a big part of the plot.
Yeah.
And so if that is not something that you want featured in films, then this would not be a film for you, for sure, because it is a massive part of the plot.
Yes, it happens both with the bride and groom's families, and then with the young thief man who shows up in the first scene of the movie, and then an hour later at the wedding. But they end up having a real discourse about qualifications and money and work and class and all of this kind of stuff. So
all of a sudden I was in the Fagin episode of season 4 of The Crown. It was
but
it was like a detour into Fagin. I was like, okay.
All of a sudden, after there was a rather hilarious and also dramatic plot twist with a drunken best man screwing up the video.
I also need to say too that I have some Nigerian friends, and I'm going to be asking them and reporting back. Is Bailey's the national drink of Nigeria, or did it sponsor this movie?
Legit questions. There was some Guinness and some Copperberg as well, but like 2 or 3 shots of the Johnny Walker bottle and the Bailey's bottle. So
Diageo got some money in there.
Question for viewers, if we have any subscribers who are Nigerian or fans of Nollywood, is this sponsorship or Nigerian weddings or both?
We would love to know.
We would love to know, because everything's product placement in America, which is arguably part of the culture as well. But I always flash to this season of Hallmark movies that was sponsored by Folgers. There was always that moment where they would take out the giant tub of Folgers from the cupboard. So I don't know if it's culture or sponsorship or both. Let us know.
Where we're heading next is a real detour, both in tone and in culture. Even though we want to focus on Africa, one of the things we would like to specifically focus about Africa is that there is a lot of cultures on the continent. And we're going to be heading north of the Sahara Desert next and having a conversation about the Arab part of the African world, which does include people who identify as and are Black, and includes people who identify as and are Arab, and it is just as messy as everywhere else in the world in terms of identity and religion and culture and faith and everywhere else. But we kind of want to remind everybody and ourselves that the cultures of North Africa are just as valid in a month talking about Africa as the cultures of sub-Saharan Africa.
Yep.
So we'll be heading up to the north next.
Yeah, and I think it's so important to have these conversations, because even as you were reading that quote from your man in the Nollywood book, talking about the narratives of how the art of film and television have shaped what we do and don't know, and what we do and don't see about the entire continent of Africa, and the exceptional diversity that exists there, that exists everywhere else, but that's not the narrative that particularly Western focused art has told. And so as we were planning out this month, we were like, let's see how how much we can find out there. And so when we came across next week's film, we were pretty excited. I think there's some really cool gender dynamics set in Egypt, and we're going to talk about Arab African identity. Let's go.
Additionally, and just in full transparency, nearly every other movie made about sub-Saharan Africa that we haven't covered was essentially some level of poverty porn, and some level of highlighting how tragic everything is.
Yeah.
And we were tired of that narrative. That narrative is told, and it is very real. But so is weddings and joy and births and life, and so is everything else.
Yeah, and that was a huge motivator for choosing this film. We wanted to highlight the significance of the Nollywood film industry. I think it's the second largest film industry in the world.
Yes, by what I read, behind Bollywood.
Behind Bollywood, yeah, which prior to this month, y'all, like, I had never heard of, and I study culture for my job. So we wanted to highlight that because it's a cool thing. We wanted to highlight joy and stories that aren't about this, as we've tried to do with the films we've selected, because that's really important, to shine a spotlight on those stories that aren't the focus of tragedy and pain and violence.
So that's it for now. We are going to get more serious next week and talk about some more complicated, grounded dynamics of life, and not just the fun, although there were serious, complicated dynamics in this. They were just seen comedically.
Yeah.
But hopefully you'll join us for that. And if, as always, if you've got things you'd like us to cover, stuff that you have thoughts on, we want to hear from you below. If this is your first time with us, like and subscribe and hit that bell so you can always get notifications of when we're on, because we're on a lot. And we will see you next time.
Take care, everybody.